usually if you have a broken bone or something, you get a clean x-ray.
Right,
You
yeah.
snap your radius, you go in, the doctor points to this jagged white line on the film, and boom,
Yeah.
the solution is immediate. You cast it, you let it heal.
It's very binary.
Exactly. It's binary. It's visible.
Yeah.
And I think most importantly, it's comforting. You know what's wrong. But what is the x-ray for a society where, millions of men are reporting just unprecedented levels of isolation?
Yeah, the statistics are staggering right now.
They really are. And at the same time, women are completely opting out of the very concept of romantic partnership, like entirely.
Which is a massive cultural shift.
It is. And when you step into this world of human connection and neurodevelopment and systemic trauma, suddenly that x-ray machine is just utterly useless. We're looking at this diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky.
Very murky. And the symptoms are everywhere.
Everywhere. We've got a full-blown male loneliness pandemic. Relationships are mutating into these extractive, almost predatory dynamics. And there is just this cultural exhaustion that seems to be breaking the back of modern dating for you, for me, for everyone.
So the symptoms are highly visible, right? But the underlying mechanics are what we are really pulling from the source stack today.
And we have a wild stack of sources today.
We really do. To understand a societal shift of this magnitude, we have to look at the foundational programming of the human brain. So the sources we're synthesizing today span a really wide spectrum.
Like incredibly wide.
Yeah, we are pulling from neuroendocrinology and physics. Specifically, there's this great dialogue between Dr. Robert Sapolsky and Neil deGrasse Tyson regarding biological determinism and free will.
Right. Starting at the absolute bottom.
Exactly. And then we are routing that through the existential psychotherapy of Dr. Irvin Yalom.
Which gets heavy.
Very heavy. Then we apply the cultural critique of bell hooks from her book, The Will to Change, to examine the specific systemic forces of traditional patriarchy. And finally, we are utilizing Professor Sam Vaknin's psychological profiling of narcissism and misogyny to observe these dynamics at their absolute pathological extreme.
I realize that sounds like an almost chaotic stack of information. Like, if you were listening to this, you might be wondering how quantum physics and subatomic particle decay have literally any bearing on a guy sitting alone in his apartment feeling totally alienated.
Or a woman who has just decided that the emotional labor of a relationship is no longer worth it.
Right. The cost of admission is just too high. But the promise here, the mission for this deep dive, is that these aren't disparate topics at all. They are sequential layers of the exact same problem.
They fit together perfectly.
They really do. We are going to trace the breakdown of human connection from the literal neurons in our brains all the way up to the societal structures we've built to protect ourselves.
Which means we need to start at the absolute bedrock.
Let's do it. Before we even analyze gender dynamics or the culture of modern dating, we have to establish whether we are even making choices at all.
Right. Are we consciously choosing our relationship dynamics, or are we just biological machines running unseen scripts driven by fear?
And Robert Sapolsky's work, which he discusses with Neil deGrasse Tyson in our sources, insists that the very concept of free will is just an illusion.
A total illusion.
And he uses this thing called the hungry judge effect to demonstrate just how terrifyingly automated we actually are.
Yeah, the Hungry Judge study is, well, it's a foundational piece of behavioral science. And it completely dismantles our perception of human rationality.
Break it down for us.
So the researchers examined the decisions of parole board judges. Now, these are individuals whose entire professional identity and their extensive legal training is predicated on objective, rational arbitration.
Right. They are supposed to be the most logical people in the room.
Exactly. They are tasked with deciding whether a prisoner is granted parole based on this highly complex matrix of legal statutes, psychological evaluations, behavioral history in prison.
Serious stuff.
Very serious. And the conscious assumption is that the judge's mind is weighing all these abstract concepts to reach a just, rational conclusion. But the data revealed that the single greatest statistical predictor of a favorable parole ruling had absolutely nothing to do with the prisoner or the law.
Which is insane to think about.
It was the amount of time that had elapsed since the judge last ate a meal.
Wow. I mean, the numbers on this in this study are just staggering.
They really are.
Like if a prisoner's case was heard first thing in the morning, shortly after the judge had a nice breakfast, they had roughly a 65% chance of being granted parole.
Pretty good odds.
Yeah. But as the morning progressed and blood sugar levels naturally depleted in the judge, that grant rate just plummeted on a steep curve. It eventually hits near zero just before the lynching.
Big 0% chance.
Basically zero. And then the judge recesses, eats a sandwich, and immediately upon returning to the bench, boom, the parole grant rate spikes right back up to 65%.
It's terrifying. We are talking about a man's freedom, a massive life-altering trajectory, being dictated entirely by the glycemic index of another human being.
Yeah, literally the blood sugar of the guy in the robe.
And the really crucial element here is the narrative the brain constructs to hide this reality.
Oh, this is the craziest part.
Right, because if you were to halt the proceedings right before lunch and ask the judge why they denied the last 5 parole requests, the judge would not say, my blood sugar is crashing and my neurobiology is defaulting to a state of risk aversion.
Right, they don't say, I'm hangry, go back to jail.
Exactly. They will provide a meticulously rationalized legalistic justification. They will cite a specific infraction from the prisoner's file, or they'll quote a psychological risk assessment.
They make up a story.
The biological state decides the outcome, and the conscious mind rapidly fabricates a story to justify it, to maintain the illusion of intellectual agency.
Think about how that maps onto our daily lives, especially if you are listening to this and thinking about your relationships.
Oh, it maps perfectly.
You get into a massive relationship-ending fight with your partner at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday.
Right.
And in your mind, you are arguing about respect or finances or a fundamental incompatibility in your values. You're building this grand narrative about why this person is wrong for you.
But what if the only actual reality is that you both had a really stressful day at work, your cortisol levels are elevated, your serotonin is totally depleted, and neither of you has had dinner?
Exactly. Sapolsky is arguing that we are constantly acting out these biological imperatives and then wrapping them in the language of conscious choice.
We think we are philosophers debating morality, when in reality we are just meat computers reacting to hormone fluctuations.
Meat computers, that's so bleak. And Sapolsky expands this far beyond immediate blood sugar, right?
He does. The broader argument is that our entire existence is this unbroken chain of biological, genetic, and environmental predetermination.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning the decision you make in this exact microsecond is the inevitable result of the neurochemistry you possess right now.
Okay.
And that neurochemistry was shaped by what you ate this morning, the sleep you had last night, and the epigenetic changes triggered by your environment last year.
It just keeps going back.
Right. That environment interacted with the brain structure you developed during childhood, which was influenced by the stress hormones your mother experienced while pregnant with you, all of which is built on the genetic code inherited from your ancestors.
Wow.
There is literally no gap in this chain for a self to step in and alter the outcome. It is a closed loop of cause and effect.
I struggle with the scale of this.
Most people do. It's a lot.
It's one thing to concede that my biology makes me irritable before dinner, and that irritability might make me snap at my partner. It is a much harder pill to swallow when we scale that up to the massive defining choices of my life. Like the intuitive defense mechanisms to say, fine, biology chooses whether I prefer vanilla or chocolate ice cream.
But I choose who I marry.
Right. I choose who I marry. I choose whether I engage in toxic, manipulative behavior. I choose my moral framework.
We desperately want to draw a line in the sand and declare that the big things are immune to the biology.
Exactly. And Tyson brings this up in the source material, looking for an escape hatch through physics.
Yeah.
Which I love.
It's a great pivot.
Because if neurobiology paints us into a deterministic corner, does the fundamental physics of the universe offer a way out?
Well, Tyson introduces chaos theory and the mechanistic view of the universe following the Big Bang.
Right.
If you view the universe as a complex billiard table and the Big Bang was the initial break, then every atom has been colliding with every other atom in a perfectly predictable sequence for billions of years.
Like clockwork.
Exactly. If you had a computer powerful enough to track the trajectory of every atom, you could predict the entire future of the universe, including the exact words we are speaking right now.
Which is classical determinism.
Yes. But Tyson points to the quantum realm as the potential disruption to this clockwork universe. Because at the subatomic level, classical physics just breaks down.
Things get weird.
Very weird. We observe genuine randomness. Virtual particles pop in and out of existence seemingly without any cause.
Right.
Quantum fluctuations mean that we cannot perfectly predict the state and location of a particle simultaneously.
So the argument goes, if you're following this, if there is genuine randomness at the foundational level of reality, then the universe isn't perfectly predictable.
Right.
And if the universe isn't predictable, determinism is broken, and maybe, just maybe, that quantum randomness bubbles up into the synapses of our brains and gives us the space for free will.
It is a very tempting philosophical leap. But Sapolsky, and really the consensus in our sources, they shut it down entirely.
Of course they do.
Because even if we concede that a quantum fluctuation could alter the firing of a single neuron in a way that cascades into a macro-level behavior, randomness is fundamentally incompatible with the concept of will.
Ah, I see.
If your decision to marry someone or your decision to act abusively is dictated by the random decay of an isotope in your frontal lobe, you still aren't the author of that decision.
Because it was random.
Exactly. You are substituting a deterministic clockwork gear for a random roll of the quantum dice.
Right.
In neither scenario is there a conscious, autonomous agent sitting behind the controls making a deliberate choice.
So the implication there is profoundly bleak.
Very much so.
We are just passengers in vehicles that are driving themselves, but we're completely convinced that we have our hands on the steering wheel.
That's the illusion.
And if we apply this to the societal issues we are digging into today, the male loneliness pandemic, the breakdown of modern dating, it suggests that the toxic structures we inhabit aren't even things we actively chose.
Right. They are just the inevitable output of our collective biological algorithms interacting with our environment.
But this raises the most crucial tension in our stack of sources.
Which is?
If we are just biological machines running scripts we didn't write, why does it hurt so much?
Oh, yeah. That's the question.
Why do we experience such profound anguish and loneliness and terror? A machine doesn't care if it's isolated.
A laptop doesn't get lonely.
Exactly. A machine doesn't have an existential crisis. This requires us to bridge Sapolsky's neurobiology with the psychological reality mapped out by Dr. Irvin Yalom. Because the defining characteristic of this particular biological machine is its agonizing level of self-awareness.
Right. And Yalom's work in existential psychotherapy addresses the precise psychological fallout of that biological trap we've just outlined.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Well, our biology is programmed with one overriding directive.
Survive.
Keep the machine running. Exactly. But our evolutionary development granted us this advanced cognitive capacity to project into the future, to abstract, and to recognize patterns.
Which seems like a good thing.
It is, for building cities. But it creates a devastating paradox internally. We are biologically desperate to survive, yet we possess the cognitive awareness to know that survival is definitively impossible.
We know we are going to die.
We know with absolute certainty that the machine will eventually fail.
And Yalom argues that this realization isn't just a fleeting thought we occasionally entertain, right? Like when we see a scary news report.
No, it is the hum in the background of our entire existence.
He calls it death anxiety.
Yes. Death anxiety. It is a fundamental terror that underpins almost all of our neuroses, our ambitions, our anxieties.
It drives everything.
We are constantly engaged in an arms race against our own mortality. We try to build legacies, amass wealth, achieve status, and all of it is just an elaborate defense mechanism against the knowledge that we are finite.
And this death anxiety leads directly to the core of our relational struggles, which is what Yalom defines as existential isolation.
Right, which is vastly different from interpersonal loneliness.
How so?
Interpersonal loneliness is, the feeling of not having a date for the weekend or lacking a supportive friend group.
The kind you can fix by going to a party.
Right, it can be remedied by socialization. Existential isolation, however, is the unbridgeable fundamental gulf between yourself and any other conscious being.
The ultimate aloneness.
It is the chilling realization that you enter this existence alone, you will experience your consciousness entirely alone, and you will depart this existence alone.
I mean, think about how much time you spend with them. You can never truly experience their consciousness.
Never.
You can never look out of their eyes.
Yeah.
You are permanently sealed inside your own subjective experience. It is literal solitary confinement of the mind.
And Yalom's experiences with group therapy, which the sources detail extensively, highlight how humans attempt to cope with this paralyzing despair.
What happens in group therapy?
When people are brought together in a therapeutic setting, particularly when dealing with grief or terminal illness, they are forced to confront this existential isolation head-on.
The usual distractions are gone.
Right. The defense mechanisms are stripped away. And in those settings, Yalom observes that humans desperately seek connection as a shield against the void.
So connection is the cure.
In a way. When individuals collectively acknowledge the shared terror of mortality and the reality of their isolation, a profound connection occurs. The shared vulnerability of being alone together becomes the very bridge that makes the isolation bearable.
But there's a catch, right?
A huge one. Outside of that highly regulated, healthy therapeutic environment, humans utilize wildly pathological methods to achieve this connection.
We don't do it the healthy way.
No, we do not just build bridges. We attempt to consume each other.
Wow. We cling to partners.
Yes.
We try to fuse our identities with them, hoping that if we become a we, the terrifying I will just cease to exist.
We use other people as mirrors to validate our existence. We demand that they reflect back a version of ourselves that feels permanent and safe.
We use relationships as a distraction.
Yeah.
Basically like a narcotic to numb the death anxiety.
Exactly.
So let's synthesize this before we move to the cultural critique.
Yeah.
If Sapolsky is correct that we are deterministic machines,
Right.
and Yolam is correct that our self-awareness makes us profoundly terrified of our inevitable destruction and isolation,
Yes.
then the massive, complex social structures we build aren't just arbitrary cultural developments.
Not at all.
They're immense collective coping mechanisms.
They are organized systems designed to manage our existential dread, regulate our biological drives, and give us a script to follow so we don't have to stare into the abyss every single day.
That makes so much sense. And one of the most pervasive, deeply entrenched operating systems we have ever designed as a species is the system of traditional patriarchy.
Which brings the systemic analysis of bell hooks into sharp focus.
And before we dive into hooks, just to be clear for everyone listening, we are just looking at what the authors are arguing here.
Yeah.
We aren't taking sides politically. We are just unpacking the framework provided in the sources.
Exactly. We're strictly analyzing the text. So if we view patriarchy not merely as a political structure, but as an elaborate, generationally entrenched defense mechanism against existential vulnerability, we can begin to understand the specific mechanics of the current crisis.
The loneliness crisis.
Right. Hook's work, particularly in The Will to Change, provides a forensic examination of how this specific coping mechanism operates, and more importantly, how it catastrophically fails the very people it was ostensibly designed to protect.
This is where we hit the core of the mission for today's deep dive: the male loneliness pandemic and the cultural exhaustion of women.
Because we are seeing a societal breaking point.
The data points are just everywhere. You've got men reporting fewer close friendships than at any point in recorded history.
Skyrocketing rates of deaths of despair.
A completely pervasive sense of alienation. And simultaneously, there is a massive cultural movement of women who are fundamentally fed up.
They are opting out of heterosexual relationships.
Choosing singlehood. And loudly refusing to carry the emotional labor they have historically managed. So to understand this collision, we have to look at the blueprint of the patriarchal armor.
Well, Hooks argues that under traditional patriarchal rules, the defining characteristic of masculinity is the active restriction and suppression of emotion.
From day one.
From the earliest stages of neurodevelopment, boys are subjected to a rigorous conditioning process that equates vulnerability with weakness and emotional fluency with the loss of status.
They were taught to sever their connection to their own emotional landscape.
Stoicism is demanded, pain must be endured silently, and the only emotional expressions that are culturally sanctioned are anger or aggressive dominance.
Think about the day-to-day reality of that conditioning for a second. A young boy falls and scrapes his knee. The patriarchal script doesn't allow him to sit with the pain and seek comfort. It demands he man up and suppress the tears.
He learns that his emotional needs are a liability.
He learns to disconnect from his internal state entirely. Now, map this onto Yalom's existential dread we just talked about.
Right, the terror of isolation.
We are all terrified, isolated machines. The only known cure for existential isolation is authentic, vulnerable connection with another human being.
But patriarchy takes half the population and systematically beats the capacity for vulnerability out of them.
It hands them a heavy suit of iron armor and tells them this will keep you safe.
And that armor analogy is remarkably precise for understanding the mechanics of this isolation.
How so?
Well, the armor is designed for combat, right? For survival in a harsh competitive hierarchy. It effectively deflects external attacks.
It does its job.
But the tragedy of the armor is that it is indiscriminately impermeable. You cannot feel a weapon through it, but you also cannot feel a touch.
You can't feel a hug.
You cannot experience the warmth of connection. The man inside the armor is technically protected from being perceived as weak, but he is completely and utterly starved of the emotional sustenance required to mitigate his existential dread.
He is safe, but he is dying of relational malnutrition.
And because he has been denied the vocabulary and the practice skill of emotional fluency, he literally doesn't know how to take the armor off.
Or even that he can.
Right. He just knows that he is in agonizing pain from the isolation. And this is the loneliness pandemic.
It is millions of men who have followed the patriarchal script perfectly. They have achieved the stoicism and the protective shell, only to realize that the shell is a solitary confinement cell.
They are isolated because they have been trained to be isolated.
And this deficit in emotional fluency leads directly to the secondary crisis, right? The dynamic of the fed-up woman.
Historically, the patriarchal contract operated on a very specific division of labor. Men provided the physical and financial security, the exterior defense, while women were tasked with the entirety of the emotional and relational labor.
Because men were conditioned to be emotionally mute.
Exactly. So women were socialized to be the emotional translators, the conflict mediators, and the empathetic caretakers.
They managed the emotional ecosystem of the whole relationship.
They essentially acted as the connective tissue that the man was unable to provide.
Let's look at what that actually looks like in a living room, practically speaking.
Okay.
The man comes home from a grueling day. He's completely shut down, radiating stress, but he's unable to articulate it.
Right. He can't say, I'm stressed because of X.
No. So the woman has to read the micro-expressions. She has to interpret the silence. She has to carefully manage the environment so as not to trigger an outburst and gently coax the stress out of him.
She is managing his emotional regulation because he cannot do it himself.
She is doing the work of two people to maintain one connection.
And for generations, this was just the accepted baseline.
But the cultural shift we are witnessing right now is the collective realization by women that this labor is exhausting, it's unreciprocated, and ultimately it's unsustainable.
And the source material highlights this as a critical breaking point. Women are increasingly refusing to act as the sole emotional infrastructure for their partners.
They are demanding emotional reciprocity.
They want partners who can articulate their own internal states, who can self-regulate, and who can engage in mutual vulnerability.
And when this demand is met with the rigid, impermeable armor of the patriarchal man,
the connection just shatters.
the women step back, and the men, stripped of their outsourced emotional management, are left utterly unmoored.
The patriarchal programming has just become fundamentally maladaptive in the modern relational landscape.
And we must delve into the most unsettling aspect of Hook's analysis here, which addresses the focus on men as predators under patriarchy.
Yes, and again, we must remain strictly analytical and impartial here, and adhering tightly to how the source material defines this term.
Right. Hooks is not primarily discussing physical violence or criminal predation in this specific context, though obviously that is a tragic reality for many.
She's describing a specific, normalized, extractive relationship dynamic.
Okay, so if a man is desperately lonely, terrified of his existential isolation, but completely incapable of vulnerable mutual connection, how does he secure a partner?
Well, according to the framework provided by Hooks, if mutual connection is impossible due to the restriction of emotion, the only remaining avenue for securing a partner is through domination and control. The relationship is not viewed as an alliance of equals, but as a territory to be conquered and managed.
So the dynamic becomes inherently exploitative.
Or predatory in the sociological sense. The goal is to secure the self by subsuming the other.
The man uses the partner not as a companion, but as utility.
To regulate his own emotional state, to validate his masculinity, and to serve his needs without reciprocating on a fundamental emotional level.
It is the difference between a symbiotic relationship and a parasitic one.
That's a good way to put it.
The armored man demands warmth from the partner, but refuses to offer any vulnerability in return. He extracts the emotional labor, the physical intimacy, the domestic support, just draining the partner's resources to sustain his own heavily defended ego.
He doesn't want to know her. He wants to use her to stabilize himself against the void.
When you view relationships through this extractive lens, you really begin to see how the patriarchal script turns connection into a zero-sum game of power and submission.
Which naturally leads us to the most extreme pathological manifestation of these concepts.
Because it gets worse.
It does. If traditional patriarchy creates an environment that encourages emotional isolation, domination, and the utilitarian use of partners, What does that look like when it mutates into a clinical psychological disorder?
We turn to Professor Sam Vaknin's extensive profiling of malignant narcissism.
To examine the darkest possible outcome of these dynamics. Narcissism, in this context, can be viewed as the patriarchal operating system running without any ethical or empathetic constraints whatsoever.
Vaknin's work is incredibly dense and honestly disturbing.
Very.
The first assertion he makes in our source material is a direct continuation of our previous point. He argues that narcissists are fundamentally misogynist.
Yes. They do not merely struggle with intimacy, they actively abhor it.
And Vaknin points out this fascinating detail about cerebral narcissists. Right.
Yeah, cerebral narcissists are those who derive their sense of superiority from their intellect or achievements rather than physical appearance.
Right.
And he notes that many of them are essentially asexual.
But asexual. Because you usually picture narcissists as these hypersexual playboy types.
Right, but Vaknin argues they hold the physical act of sex and the emotional vulnerability of intimacy in absolute contempt. They view the very concept of a mutual equal partnership with a woman as repulsive.
Wow. To understand the mechanics of this contempt, we have to integrate Yalom and hooks into Vaknin's framework, don't we?
We do, because true intimacy requires recognizing the partner as a separate, autonomous, fully realized human being.
And for the narcissist, acknowledging the autonomy of another person triggers Yalom's existential terror.
Exactly. It reminds the narcissist that they are not a god, but a finite, isolated individual in a universe they do not control.
And furthermore, true intimacy requires vulnerability, which violates the prime directive of the patriarchal armor.
So how does the narcissist solve this paralyzing dilemma? Through complete and total dehumanization.
They do not interact with a human being. They interact with an object.
And the clinical terminology Vaknin uses to describe this objectification is chilling.
What does he call it?
The partner is referred to as secondary supply.
Secondary supply.
To the narcissist, the woman is not a person. She is a human battery.
That is so dark.
Her literal function in the relationship, what Vaknin calls her chore, is to act as a repository for his grandiosity.
Her job is to witness his moments of glory, to absorb his brilliance, his achievements, and his constructed false self.
She accumulates this past narcissistic supply.
And the mechanism of extraction is highly regulated, right?
Yes. The narcissist exists in a state of constant, precarious emotional regulation.
They're always on the verge of collapsing.
When he experiences a deficit, a perceived slight, a failure, a moment where the grandiosity is threatened, he turns to the secondary supply.
The human battery.
Her required function is to release the accumulated supply back to him in an orderly manner.
Reflecting his own idealized image back to him to stabilize his collapsing ego.
She is a mirror designed only to show him his own godhood.
But this creates a devastating psychological trap for both of them, and it inevitably leads to profound abuse.
Vaknin maps out this vicious cycle of contempt with terrifying precision.
Walk us through the cycle.
So the narcissist is obsessed with maintaining absolute superiority, right?
Right.
Therefore, he cannot partner with someone he views as a true equal because an equal might challenge him. So he specifically selects a partner he perceives as submissive or whom he can easily dominate. He often views them as intellectually or socially inferior.
But this choice breeds an unbearable internal paradox for the narcissist's fragile ego.
The internal logic collapses on itself. The narcissist believes himself to be a towering intellect, a unique and superior being. Yes. Yet, he is entirely desperately dependent on this woman, whom he has already categorized as inferior, to regulate his emotional state and maintain his sanity.
And the realization of this dependence is agonizing for him.
He thinks, how can a god rely on a peasant for survival?
He cannot tolerate the shame of his own dependency. So, following the mechanisms of his pathology, he projects that self-contempt outward, directly onto the woman.
He hates her because he needs her.
That is the engine of narcissistic abuse.
The woman is not cherished. She is reluctantly tolerated.
And Vaknin's analogy in the text for this is just brilliant and devastating. He says she is tolerated in the exact same way one reluctantly pays the premium on an insurance policy.
Right. You resent the cost, you hate handing over the money, but you know you need the policy to survive a catastrophe.
The partner is a resented necessity.
Now, there is one notable exception to this specific type of resentment in Vaknin's profiles, which further illustrates the objectification.
What's the exception?
If the partner is highly attractive or possesses significant social status, the subjugation of that partner becomes a primary source of supply in itself.
She becomes a trophy.
Exactly. By dominating someone the outside world values highly, the narcissist validates his superiority to the public. Her value is entirely instrumental. She is a prop used to signal his dominance to the tribe.
This objectification isn't monolithic, though. Vaknin's sources demand that we differentiate between the manifestations of this pathology.
Because we often have a very cartoonish view of a narcissist.
Yeah, the overtly arrogant, preening guy taking selfies at the gym.
Right. But the mechanics of this disorder adapt to the environment. Vaknin outlines 3 distinct categories of malignant narcissists: grandiose, covert, and borderline.
And it's the varying functionality of these types that makes the relational landscape so incredibly dangerous.
Let's examine the low-functioning end of the spectrum first, which Vaknin aligns with the borderline type.
Okay, what does that look like?
The low-functioning malignant narcissist is characterized by profound dysfunction across all areas of life. Their need for narcissistic supply and their underlying sadism are so completely unregulated that they cannot maintain the basic social contracts required to exist in society.
They can't fake it.
Not at all. For this individual, every single human interaction is perceived as a battlefield where their grandiosity must be asserted. They cannot merely go to the grocery store. They must humiliate the cashier to prove their superiority.
Wow.
They cannot go on a date without interrogating and devaluing the partner immediately.
Because they possess zero impulse control. They just scorch the earth everywhere they go.
And the source material outlines the inevitable trajectory of this. It's cumulative adverse outcomes.
Meaning their life falls apart.
They get fired from every job because they attack their managers. They are abandoned by every partner because the abuse is immediate and relentless. Their lives rapidly collapse into chaos.
And how does the narcissist handle this undeniable proof of their own failure?
They utilize what Vaknin calls schizoid withdrawal.
They hide.
They physically and socially retreat from the world, locking themselves away. And the narrative they construct to protect their ego is one of haughty rejection.
Right. They say, I am not failing because I am incompetent. I am withdrawing because this society of inferior peasants is not worthy of my towering intellect.
Exactly. It is a massive delusion constructed to mask total functional incompetence.
Which brings us to the most insidious and dangerous profile in Vaknin's work, the high-functioning malignant narcissist, which he categorizes as prosocial or communal.
This is where the mechanisms of abuse become deeply systemic and incredibly difficult to diagnose from the outside.
Because the high-functioning narcissist is not the abrasive failure living in a basement.
No. They are often highly successful, charismatic, and deeply embedded in the social fabric.
They are the beloved town mayor, the charismatic CEO, the head of the local charity, or the respected religious leader.
And the mechanics of the prosocial narcissist completely upend our standard expectations of predatory behavior.
We assume a predator is universally destructive.
But Vaknin explains that this type of narcissist might actually engage in legitimate, highly visible acts of good.
Like what?
They might build houses for the homeless, raise millions for charity, or lead their community through a crisis.
But there is a catch.
A huge one. The crucial distinction is the mechanism driving the behavior. They are not acting out of empathy or a genuine desire to alleviate suffering.
No.
They are performing these acts strictly as an elaborate mechanism to harvest high-grade narcissistic supply.
Praise.
Exactly. And the structural key to the prosocial narcissist is their rigid binary division of the world into an in-group and an out-group.
How does that work?
The in-group is the community they lead, the charity they run, or the congregation they preach to. Within this in-group, they function flawlessly. They provide resources, they offer charismatic leadership, and they appear profoundly benevolent.
And in return?
In return, the in-group provides the required adulation, respect, and validation of their grandiosity. As long as the in-group plays their assigned role as the applauding audience, the narcissist protects them.
But the underlying psychopathy and sadism have not magically disappeared.
No.
They have simply been efficiently compartmentalized.
Vaknin explains that all of the narcissist's malice, aggression, and cruelty are channeled exclusively toward the outgroup.
And who is the outgroup?
It consists of competitors, critics, rivals, or anyone who fails to offer the required adulation.
So they destroy their enemies.
The narcissist can ruthlessly destroy a business rival or viciously campaign against a political opponent, and the in-group will often cheer them on, viewing it as a defense of their shared values.
And this compartmentalization is what makes the experience of the romantic partner so uniquely horrific.
It is a nightmare.
When the narcissist first targets a partner, they are brought into the inner sanctum of the in-group. They are idealized, bombarded with affection, and treated as the perfect mirror.
But inevitably, the partner, being a real human being and not a flawless reflection, will fail to provide the constant, unregulated supply the narcissist demands.
They might express a need, voice a criticism, or just demonstrate autonomy.
And the moment that happens, the partner is instantaneously reclassified
They are ejected from the protected in-group.
and relegated to the outgroup. And because they are now the outgroup, they become the primary target for all of the compartmentalized sadism.
Behind closed doors, the partner is subjected to relentless psychological warfare, gaslighting, and devaluation.
They become that reluctantly paid insurance premium we talked about, despised for existing, but kept around to absorb the abuse.
But here's the true horror of the pro-social dynamic. When the victim tries to seek help, they realize they are trapped in a completely isolated reality.
Nobody believes them.
They go to their friends, their family, or their community and try to explain that this man is a monster. But the community only sees the benevolent leader of the in-group.
They see the man who runs the charity and remembers everyone's birthday.
The armor of patriarchy we discussed earlier is completely weaponized here. The society sees a strong, capable, generous leader. The partner is the only one who sees the predator.
The cognitive dissonance is absolute, and the isolation is total.
It is a masterful, terrifying manipulation of social structures. The narcissist uses the very systems designed to foster community as camouflage for their pathology.
And if we pause to survey the landscape we have just mapped out, the bleakness is overwhelming.
It really is. We began with Sapolsky's assertion that we are deterministic machines, devoid of free will, reacting blindly to neurochemical impulses.
Then we layered on Yalom's revelation that we are cursed with the self-awareness to be terrified of our own inevitable demise and profound isolation.
We examined Hook's analysis of how we attempt to cope with this terror by building the rigid, emotionally restrictive armor of patriarchy, a system that starves men of connection and extracts emotional labor from women until they are utterly fed up.
And finally, we stared into the abyss of Vaknin's malignant narcissist, observing what happens when this entire broken system is hijacked by a pathology that turns human beings into disposable batteries.
We have meticulously documented exactly why the male loneliness pandemic is raging, why women are opting out of relationships, and why we are failing to connect.
We have diagnosed the disease.
But a diagnosis without a treatment plan is just a death sentence.
Right.
If our biology betrays us, our existential dread isolates us, our cultural structures starve us, and our pathological extremes consume us, how do we survive?
How do we build genuine, sustainable connection in the face of all these overwhelming forces?
Right.
Well, to construct a functional model of connection, we must first aggressively dismantle the dysfunctional models we have normalized.
Which brings us to the final piece of our source stack.
Yes, the final crucial piece of source material from Vaknin provides exactly this. It's a module titled, What Love Is Not.
It is an exercise in negative definition.
Before we can learn to connect, we must unlearn the toxic habits, the cultural conditioning, and the pathological fantasies that currently masquerade as love.
This section of the text is incredibly confronting if you really read it, because it targets the exact behaviors that modern culture romanticizes.
Vaknin lists several specific, pervasive misunderstandings, and the first one is a direct attack on our ego.
He says, loving someone is not the same as loving the way they love you.
Think deeply about the mechanics of your own past relationships. How often have you stayed with someone or claimed to love someone when in reality you were completely disconnected from who they actually were?
You didn't cherish their unique qualities or their flaws or their internal world.
What you actually loved was the validation they provided you. You loved how they made you feel about yourself.
You loved the devotion they offered, the status they brought you, or the way they consistently affirmed your own worldview.
And that is not love. That is narcissism light.
It is utilizing another human being as a mirror to gaze at your own reflection.
It is a subtle distinction, but a profound one. It is the difference between outward-facing appreciation and inward-facing consumption.
And Vaknin continues this deconstruction by stating, it is not loving to be in love.
This point directly addresses our cultural addiction to the honeymoon phase.
Right, the intense, dramatic, obsessive rush of early romance. The butterflies, the inability to stop thinking about them.
That is primarily a neurochemical state. It is a biological imperative designed to facilitate bonding and reproduction.
It is a state of being, not an action.
Exactly. When those chemicals inevitably subside, as biology dictates they must, relationships built solely on that feeling collapse.
Genuine connection is the deliberate, ongoing action of cherishing someone after the chemical high has faded.
The next point Vaknin makes ties directly back into Yalom's concept of existential dread. Vaknin states, unequivocally, love is not merging with your partner.
Man, we are relentlessly conditioned by fairy tales and romantic comedies and pop music to view love as the ultimate fusion.
We talk about finding our other half, or two souls becoming one.
We romanticize the idea of finishing each other's sentences and losing our individuality in the relationship.
But if we view this through Yalom's lens, the desire to merge is not romantic. It is a desperate pathological defense mechanism.
Because you are terrified of your existential isolation, so you attempt to obliterate the boundaries between yourself and your partner.
You try to consume them, or allow them to consume you, hoping that if you become a single entity, the terrifying reality of dying alone will vanish.
And as we saw in the analysis of narcissism, the attempt to merge is the exact mechanism of abuse.
The narcissist attempts to subsume the partner, demanding they abandon their autonomy to become an extension of the narcissist's ego.
Genuine love, conversely, demands the terrifying acceptance of separation.
It requires two complete, distinct, autonomous individuals who fully acknowledge the unbridgeable gulf between them, yet consciously choose to build a fragile bridge across it anyway.
It is an alliance of two, not the fusion into one.
Furthermore, Vaknin argues a point that dismantles almost every modern dating expectation. He says love never involves fantasy or idealization.
We are addicted to idealizing our partners. We meet someone, we see a few positive traits, and we immediately construct a massive fictional avatar in our minds.
We project all our unmet needs, all our desires, and all our expectations onto this person. We put them on a pedestal.
And it feels wonderful for a short time.
But it is a profound act of disrespect to the actual human being standing in front of you.
Because if you are idealizing someone, you are not interacting with them. You are interacting with a ghost you invented.
And when that real person inevitably fails to live up to the impossible standards of your fantasy, when they have a bad day, when they are selfish, when they show you their flaws,
You feel betrayed. You punish them not for doing something wrong, but for failing to be the fictional character you assign them to play.
True connection requires the agonizing work of dismantling the fantasy, looking at the messy, mundane, flawed reality of the other person, and choosing to value them exactly as they are.
So the synthesis of Vaknin's negative definitions brings us to the core thesis of our current crisis.
People are mistaking desperation, a profound hatred of their own loneliness, or the desire to assume a parental, controlling role for actual love.
Let's apply this directly to the loneliness pandemic. Millions of people are wandering through this landscape, desperate for connection, but they are utilizing a completely broken toolkit.
They are trying to merge with partners to escape their existential dread.
They are projecting impossible fantasies. They are demanding that their partners act as emotional regulators.
And they're doing all of this while wearing the rigid, impenetrable armor of patriarchal conditioning that prevents them from actually feeling anything.
They are performing every possible relational maneuver except the one that is required, seeing the other person as an autonomous equal and offering mutual, unguarded vulnerability.
If we pull all these disparate threads together, this sack of sources actually provides a cohesive, albeit incredibly demanding roadmap for navigating out of this crisis.
Okay, let's lay out the roadmap.
First, Sapolsky and Tyson demonstrate that our baseline is fiercely deterministic.
Right.
Our neurobiology will always default to impulsive, fear-based, reactive, and self-preserving behaviors. We are wired to snap when we are hungry and withdraw when we are stressed.
Therefore, connection requires us to actively, consciously, and constantly fight our own biological programming. It is an act of defiance against our own neurons.
Second, Yalom reveals that beneath our daily anxieties lies the profound terror of mortality and existential isolation.
So we must have the courage to face that dread directly, acknowledging our inherent aloneness, rather than using other human beings as human shields against the void.
We must stop demanding that our partners cure a condition that is fundamentally incurable.
Third, Bell Hooks demands that we address the cultural infrastructure.
We must actively, aggressively dismantle the patriarchal armor that equates masculinity with stoicism, dominance, and emotional restriction.
That armor is literally starving men to death. and exhausting the women who are fed up with trying to penetrate it. Men must learn the vocabulary of vulnerability, and society must stop punishing them when they use it.
And finally, Vaknin shows us the terrifying consequences of failing to do this work.
We must remain constantly vigilant against the narcissistic urge to use our partners as supply, as mirrors, or as cast members in our internal narratives.
We must reject the extractive, predatory dynamics that prioritize domination over mutual discovery.
It is a massive, daunting prescription.
It requires an exhausting level of self-awareness.
It requires the willingness to endure the severe discomfort of true vulnerability. And it requires the courage to dismantle societal structures that, while toxic, feel deeply familiar and culturally safe.
But if we look at the headlines, if we look at the data, the alternative is what we are living through right now.
The alternative is a pandemic of isolation. It is a society comprised of armored, terrified individuals, completely unable to reach each other, who eventually turn into predators out of sheer starving desperation.
We have taken you on a sprawling, intense intellectual journey today.
We really have. We started by looking for a clean X-ray and ended up staring into the chaotic void of quantum mechanics and existential dread.
We have traced the architecture of the modern relationship crisis from the microscopic fluctuations of our blood sugar through the paralyzing fear of our own death into the suffocating cultural traps we've built.
And finally, down into the absolute darkest corners of predatory psychology. It is a murky, terrifying landscape.
It is a difficult terrain to map, but mapping it, understanding the precise mechanics of why we fail to connect, is the absolute prerequisite to building the functional bridges Yalom described.
Absolutely.
However, before we conclude this deep dive, I want to offer a final provocative thought for you to analyze. A concept that recontextualizes the entire societal shift we've discussed.
Okay, what is it?
We've spoken at length about the cultural breaking point, women becoming fed up, opting out of emotional labor, and forcing men to confront the reality of their isolation.
Right.
We naturally frame this shift through a sociological lens. We view it as a conscious, hard-fought political and social awakening. We see it as a deliberate choice to dismantle a toxic system.
Sure.
But let us return to our foundational source. If Robert Sapolsky is correct and we truly possess no free will, if we are fundamentally biological machines responding mechanically to environmental pressures,
then is this massive cultural breakdown actually a conscious moral choice?
or is it something far more primal? Is it simply an inevitable biological course correction?
Oh, wow.
Perhaps we aren't consciously choosing to dismantle these toxic patriarchal dynamics out of a sudden surge of enlightenment. Perhaps the operating system of traditional patriarchy has simply become too biologically inefficient.
It is causing too much psychological distress, too much relational friction, and resulting in plummeting reproductive rates.
If a behavior threatens the survival or the stability of the species, biology corrects it.
Perhaps our species is not having a political awakening. Perhaps we're just automatically, deterministically adapting our behaviors to ensure we don't go extinct from the sheer physiological stress of our own loneliness.
That is a staggering reframing.
Are we dismantling these structures because we finally realize it's the morally right thing to do? Or are our genes simply forcing a massive software update because the old operating system was causing the hardware to crash?
Are the women who are walking away and the men who are finally seeking therapy making brave choices? Or are they just executing a survival script written into our DNA?
That question fundamentally changes how we view every interaction we have.
It really does.
Thank you for staying with us through this incredibly deep dive into the source material. We know it was heavy, and we know it was confronting.
But our hope is that by exposing the hidden mechanics of biology, dread, and pathology, you now possess the clarity to navigate the murky waters of your own relationships.
Keep questioning the armor you have been handed. Keep challenging the biological impulses that tell you to withdraw. And most importantly, keep doing the grueling, terrifying work of seeking connection that is grounded in reality, not fantasy. We'll be back with another stack of sources soon.